before kings wore crowns, before pyramids pierced the sky, before Versailles soaked itself in floral musk, there was scent, and it came from Africa. 75,000 years ago, long before the first scroll was written or the first city built. The San people, the world's oldest known culture, were already blending buchu leaves and red ochre, not for decoration, but for the soul. They stored these sacred perfumes, not in glass flacons, but in tortoiseshell vessels carved by hand, passed through generations, holding not just fragrance, but memory, spirit, identity. While Europe was still sleeping in caves, Africa was already wearing the invisible crown of civilization. This isn't just about scent. It's about how the world forgot where it all began. This is the true origin of perfume. And it started in southern Africa. To understand where fragrance truly begins, we must return to the cradle of humankind, southern Africa. Here, the oldest living culture on Earth still walks the land, the San people. They are not just hunter-gatherers, they are the keepers of memory, of earth-bound wisdom passed from lip to ear for thousands of generations. Long before writing, they painted their stories on cave walls with ochre. But their genius didn't end with art. Archaeologists digging in the ancient layers of Blombos Cave in South Africa discovered something astonishing. Traces of red ochre and aromatic plant oils dating back nearly 75,000 years. This isn't mere coincidence, it is intention. The San were creating unguents, early forms of perfume made from buchu, a fragrant plant with antiseptic and spiritual properties, blended with animal fat or oil, and tinted with ochre. This is older than Sumer, older than Egypt, older than the Bible. It rewrites the timeline of human culture and places Africa at the very beginning of the perfume story. Not as a footnote, but as the first chapter. Now, imagine this. In a quiet San encampment under the stars, a woman kneels by the fire. She opens a small rounded container, not made of clay or glass, but of tortoise shell. Inside lies a paste, red ochre, fat, crushed, fragrant leaves. The scent rises like memory itself, wild, earthy, divine. This is not just a beauty ritual, it is communion. These tortoise-shell containers, unearthed in ancient archaeological sites, were carefully crafted. Their interiors smoothed by use, their lids delicately fitted. They were not tools, they were treasures. To the San, the tortoise represents long life, endurance, the wisdom of the earth. So to house a sacred fragrance in its shell was to house a piece of the eternal. Each vessel held more than unguent. It held ancestral presence, healing energy, the smell of the sacred. And when passed from hand to hand, these containers carried stories of who a person was, where they came from, what spirits watched over them. In today's world, perfume comes in plastic bottles. But 75,000 years ago, the San wrapped scent in ritual and meaning. And every tortoise shell was a temple. To the San, scent was not a luxury. It was a language. A language spoken through skin, smoke, and spirit. When a child was born, he was anointed with unguent not only to protect his skin, but to call in the blessings of the ancestors. When a hunter prepared for the sacred task of tracking, he rubbed buchu and ochre into his limbs, merging the human and the earth. This was more than utility. It was identity. In a world without mirrors, fragrance was how you announced your presence. It lingered when you left a space. It comforted others when you were gone. And in times of illness or mourning, it was believed that certain scents could realign the soul. What buchu, for example, was not only fragrant, it was antiseptic, anti-inflammatory, and spiritually protective. Elders say it could chase away bad spirits. Others say it brought you closer to the dream world, the place of ancestors. These rituals were passed orally. A mother to her daughter, a shaman to his apprentice. Every person had their own recipe, their own sacred blend. In this way, scent became a fingerprint unique, invisible, and sacred. Not just for attraction, not just for pleasure, but for healing, for remembering, for becoming. Long before the world sprayed perfume on their wrists, the San painted the divine on their bodies. Open any textbook, and you'll read that perfume began in ancient Mesopotamia, or perhaps in Egypt, or that it bloomed in Renaissance Europe in the courts of Versailles and Venice. They'll tell you of Catherine de' Medici's perfumed gloves, of Louis XIV's obsession with scented fountains. But they won't tell you about Blombos Cave, or the tortoise shells, or buchu. They will not mention the sun, even though their unguents predate Versailles by over 70,000 years. They credit the Greeks and the Persians for distillation, but never the African hands that blended sacred plants long before chemistry had a name. And they will describe fragrance as a symbol of civilization. But they'll ignore the civilizations that smelled divine before cities even existed. This is not accidental. It is the quiet violence of erasure. A perfume bottle in a museum is called a masterpiece. A tortoiseshell filled with scent is called a relic. Why? Because history was written by those who arrived late and wrote themselves in as the beginning. But the air does not lie, and neither does the earth. The truth? Africa didn't follow the perfume story. It authored it. They came with flags, with crosses, with guns, and with them came forgetting. The Colonial project did not begin with war. It began with the quiet theft of story. The San, once the holders of scent, of healing, of memory, were called primitive. Their culture labeled vanishing. Their knowledge dismissed as superstition. Their sacred unguents mocked as dirt and fat. Their tortoise shells discarded like trash. Entire generations were silenced, children taken, languages forbidden. And with them, the smell of ancestral knowledge faded. Meanwhile, European industries flourished. They bottled floral waters in France, while the fragrant wisdom of Africa was being buried. But even in silence, the land remembers. In forgotten corners of the Kalahari, San elders still mix ochre with fat, still speak to the ancestors with smoke and scent. They do not need museums to tell them who they are. Their memory lives in the ritual, in the rhythm, in the fragrance of home. And that is something no empire could erase. So why does this matter? Why tell the story of ancient fragrances, of ochre and buchu, of tortoise shells hidden in the dust? Because history is not just about the past. It is a mirror for the present. Because in a world obsessed with luxury brands, with perfumes named in French and bottled in crystal, we forget where scent truly began. Not in a laboratory, but in the hands of African ancestors, mixing medicine and memory beside a fire beneath the stars. It matters because when a people's memory is erased, so is their worth. And when we remember the sun, we begin to remember ourselves. Africa was never behind. Africa was never late. Africa was first. And as the world now returns to natural sense, to plant-based healing, to ancient rituals, we are not discovering something new. We are returning. Returning to the smell of red earth, to the whisper of crushed leaves, to the sacred silence of a tortoise shell full of spirit. We are returning to the origin of scent, to the womb of humanity, to the story they tried to bury, but that never stopped breathing. This is not just the history of perfume, it is the history of us.